Oh, hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Herrick. We actually have new members, sort of surprisingly. We had people joining this week. Aaron and I talked earlier in the week and decided not to have a new member orientation today, but then we had sort of a bit of a flood of new members. So that is wonderful. So today we're really going to focus on just some analysis and discussion of what happened. Jim has prepared quite a few slides to review, and there'll be time to ask questions and talk about what Jim goes over. And then we will have Julie Greenberg and our Georgia team leaders talking about what we're doing in the volunteer arena. There's been a lot of confusion about that for various reasons. One of the reasons is really good. It's because Georgia is being absolutely deluged with volunteers. And so a lot of the organizations are just kind of swimming in people, and they're just having a hard time handling it. But Julie and our Georgia team leaders will go over that. And we'll have time today, I'm sure, for just conversation and questions and discussions. So put questions, comments in the chat as usual, and we'll curate those as we go along and try to get to everybody. I just wanted to say a few words, as I tend to do at the beginning of these meetings. You know, we've been in existence now for 4 years, and we've all sort of fallen into our roles. And you know, I feel like one of my roles is just to constantly think about how to help the people in our group feel like we're doing something worthwhile. There have been many moments over the last year that it has felt actually just exhilarating. It's felt powerful and effective and exhilarating, and it has just felt like the competence and enthusiasm of this group, the participation of this group, could accomplish anything. I certainly have had, you know, so much time feeling that way, like we can do anything. And it was a really heady feeling. I'm glad I had it. It helped me survive with sanity over the recent months and years. But you know, I've been reading a lot, as all of you have, and I came upon something yesterday. Actually, it was in the last column of Roger Cohen. He was saying goodbye. He's a New York Times columnist, and he's going to be the bureau chief in Paris. And so he wrote his last column. This is just an amazing moment to have to write your last column. And it was a wonderful column, and there were just a few phrases that he was actually quoting Oliver Wendell Holmes that just really resonated for me, that I thought I would share with you all. It's really not a long quote. It's just sort of some phrases, some ideas. Basically, he was just, you know, reflecting on this moment and what he felt like. And he was just talking about the experience of being engaged in the great causes of the world. And that when you're engaged in the great causes of the world, there is and this is a quote from Oliver Wendell Holmes, a bitter cup of heroism that you often need to drink, because taking on the great causes of the world does not always lead to success, or the kind of success that you feel your heroism deserves. But that Oliver Wendell Holmes' advice was that you should wear your heart out after the unattainable. Wear your heart out after the unattainable. And today, I think we're reflecting on what was attained. There was something obviously incredibly important for our country that was attained. And I'm going to believe that we helped attain the win by Biden and Harris. Jim will talk more about that with more nuance and detail. We just learned this morning that one of our beloved candidates in North Carolina running for the Supreme Court in North Carolina, Cheri Beasley, who has been in a neck and neck runoff She was up 2,000, then she was down 100, and now it seems that the final count is she's won by 34 votes, but of course there will be a recount. And we have heard from some of the volunteers from 31st Street who worked on curing ballots in North Carolina. And, you know, I've gotten emails today saying, you know, I think I cured 34 ballots. And so, you know, when we think about all of our efforts coming down to just a few votes and knocking on one more door down that long street that only has one address on it and thinking, oh, I'm just going to skip that street. You know, this is the world we're living in now. Every tiny bit of effort we make has to count. And whether we attain what we wish for, we still have to make the effort, and we have to go down every street and knock on every door, call every voter, cure every ballot, and do everything we can. We just have to. There's no other choice. So I am, you know, still holding on to the thrill of Biden and Harris in the midst of the muck that the Republicans are continuing. But I'm going to hold on to that and believe that there will be good that comes in the next few months in the midst of the chaos. And 31st Street is not going to pause a beat. We're plowing forward to Georgia, and we'll plow forward after that. We'll figure out what to do. So thank you all for being here. We've got 135 people here today to debrief, which means all of you are still completely engaged, which is just wonderful, wonderful to see everybody. So I'm going to hand this off to Jim, and he's going to go over a PowerPoint, and then we'll move on later to talking about our volunteer efforts. Thanks, Jim.
Great. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and jump into my PowerPoint. Not even going to let you see me necessarily, unless you will later. There, can people see that, and can people hear me okay? Okay, so that's just our opening slide. These are my views of what's happened and what we should be thinking about and so forth. I don't claim to know everything by any means, so we have a lot of smart people that I'm sure can help out a lot. Starting with the outcome, and of course, the wonderful thing that Lisa mentioned is that our country's been saved from this would-be dictator. And that was more important than really anything else. But we'll spend a lot of the rest of the time talking about the everything else, because basically otherwise we pretty much got clobbered. There's no sugarcoating that. That's basically what happened. And I have some observation as to why I think that that did happen. And I'm also going to take the liberty of once having said that, to spend, I think, much more attention on what I consider to be the bright spots of what happened. So, in the overall narrative, and there's some variation, and this doesn't apply everywhere necessarily, which is that, yes, we turned out a lot of voters really well, but the Trump campaign and allies basically overdid what we did and got a massive turnout that to a large extent swamped us. What saved us was that in many places enough Republicans and independents voted for Biden, but then, and that made the big difference, but then voted for Republicans down ballot. And the most clear example I think that everybody knows about is the Maine Senate race, which still I can't understand. And it's not really the same dynamic as our legislature races, but that still makes the point. And there was a particularly strong Trump turnout in rural and ex-urban districts. And as it happens, that was the battleground in a lot of our races, but especially in North Carolina. That basically was exactly where we were trying to do battle. And so we didn't do very well. One thing we did well was raise a lot of money. Showed this pretty much, these data on at the last membership meeting. Total's now 3.5 million. We basically stopped raising money, and that's, I think good. The question is how much difference did it make? And notice that over half of that did go to North Carolina, although substantial amounts to these other states. Okay, now I'm going to start off with what I think is the bright spot in terms of our intervention. You may recall that maybe about a month or a little more before the election, we decided to be nimble and to pivot and to move into Georgia. So we supported in all 14 House candidates in key districts, and 2 of them actually did win in Georgia. They were 2 that were kind of in the upper echelon of the ones that we supported. And they're Metro Atlanta, but they did win. But you know, the Biden margin of victory was 14,000 votes. Presumably that's going to stand up. You know, I feel like our power up approach can be credited with having a significant, I don't know how much, but a significant impact on that win. And to a large extent, that's because there were quite a few of these campaigns that were really grossly underfunded. And, you know, they got off to a late start. I do think we helped get them in position, and I do think that it helped them turn out their voters significantly. One other kind of thing to recall also is that in terms of the runoff, the gap that Purdue had below, if you will, the 50% threshold that he needed to win outright was only 15,000 votes. So in a way, we kind of got double duty out of our power up. Not only did we help with the Biden victory significantly, but I think we also helped with getting Ossoff into the runoff. One related point is one of the few House races that we did win was Georgia 7th in Gwinnett County. People may remember that 2 years ago, Carolyn Bordeaux was one of the races that we weighed in significantly. She lost by a few hundred votes, as I recall. This time she won, but we also had layered in to help her. We didn't help her directly. She had a lot of money. Is that we did have 2 quite strong candidates in Gwinnett County underneath her area, one of whom won, and another one who was strong came close and also lost. So I think we can take a little bit of credit for helping win that House seat. And recall that last time I looked, you know, we were supposedly have won 219 House seats. You need 218, maybe 7 or 8 still undecided, many leaning toward Republicans. So every one of these House seats is really, really precious. There's Carolyn. Now, shifting to Pennsylvania. Again, I feel like we had this sort of positive power up impact. I think in the end, people are saying that we're going to win by 100,000 votes. I think it was about 63 last time I saw. That's of course a wider margin than in Georgia, but I still think we significantly helped with that with our 13 legislature candidates, none of whom won, by the way, just, but I think by having them have viable campaigns, that made a lot of difference. And not only was it the money difference, but that was our sort of focus for George Scott and the House candidates for major vote outreach efforts, letter writing, canvassing, et cetera, and even some voter registration. And I'm going to just pause here 1 second and praise one of our members as being high. We have many intrepid members, but Catherine Hazard was actually up there doing voter registration a couple of weeks. I don't know how many days she did, but she was doing voter registration in Dauphin County and registering a significant number of voters. After that, she was doing canvassing in Dauphin County in Pennsylvania. And then the next week I saw she was down doing vote curing in person in North Carolina. So that's really quite amazing. One thing that I think we can point to in terms of our efforts, and again, all of our efforts are not going to be the decisive thing to make a huge difference. We're one of many groups working, but Biden did carry Dauphin County by 8.5%, and Hillary only So I think that, we had some impact in that particular area as well as a bit of other places. Shifting to Iowa, again, the only candidate that won, Sarah Trone-Garriott, you may remember when she called in, a wonderful candidate, the Lutheran minister. She's the only one that won. She only won by a couple hundred votes. Presumably that's going to be enough to hold up. So we did all this calling, we contributed all this money to candidates. There is one other silver lining, which is that the money and the extensive phoning may actually have helped to save another US House seat, which is that Rita Hart in the 2nd district of Iowa. Iowa only has 4 House seats, so it's 1/4 of the state. She currently trails by 48 votes. There's going to be a recount. I think, these days recounts oftentimes don't generate much, but it's conceivable that we still might win that one. And if that's the case, then this is one case where I think you can say that there's Rita. We actually supported 4 legislature candidates within her district. And then all this phoning, that great phoning that people did with Flip the West in Iowa, could have made a significant difference. I mean, this is the kind of thing we want to be. We want to be where it makes a difference. And I think in this case is another instance of where we were. Just briefly on Wisconsin, just to mention that many months ago, we did weigh in to provide some support for the Democratic Party statewide neighbor-to-neighbor infrastructure program, which I think probably helped them. We felt like they were getting enough support, so we didn't continue that, but I'm going to go take the liberty of mentioning it because it's a state that we won by 20,000 votes. So, let's take another little bit of credit where we can. Finally, I guess, North Carolina, this is our major support, over half. We did a lot of candidate support, very strong digital with Chris Bachman. We did the safe haven tents. We did all this intensive voter outreach up, down, and sideways, including what I consider to be this heroic in-person vote curing kind of thing. And unfortunately, only 2 of our candidates won. Brian Farkas and Ricky Hurtado. Brian was one of our earlier supports, and we graduated him after a while, because we felt he was on good shape. Ricky Hurtado, we only supported with the digital, although fairly significantly. Other than that, we didn't, among our candidates, none of them won. So there's no sugarcoating that. However, maybe this is sugarcoating, I don't know. This analysis from Flip NC, they did this analysis a little less than a week ago of the major part of the vote. But based on their analysis, they said a number of our candidates actually outpaced Biden. So you'll notice in the House, even though Amy Steele lost, she did better than Biden in her district by 2.5%, at least at that time. And it's probably at least as good as some more additional votes have come in. Likewise, Emily Nicholson, and on the Senate side, 3 candidates that we supported. So again, we're at the margins, but if our candidates end up doing better than the Democratic ticket overall, that means that maybe our help should mean our help is support, having some impact, although not enough to win, unfortunately. Okay, so now we're going back to Cheri Beasley. As I look at the North Carolina Board of Elections website again 5 minutes ago, or whenever 10 minutes ago, she's ahead by 35 votes. I don't know that all the votes initial votes have been counted yet. And it was flip-flopping. There will definitely be a recount. If she ends up winning, these are all the ways and more that we did to support her. We supported digital video ads specifically for her and for the slate, for the judicial slate, for the overall slate. We supported, our legislature candidates with the focus on Africans Americans. And again, this very extensive voter outreach. Since she was a statewide candidate, she benefited from all these things. And, I think if she does win by 35 votes, we, along with many other people, can say, had it not been for us, that she would not have won. And she's such a powerful, wonderful force in North Carolina that in my heart of hearts, I feel like that might well have been worth our efforts just to make that happen. Maybe I'm rationalizing, but I don't necessarily think so. Okay, so why didn't we do better? Why didn't we do better? I've already made the point. I showed this slide a month ago. People remember. And I said, we're going to have turnout, but Trump's going to have turnout too. And if his turnout is better than ours, it's going to be tough. And that's the way it turned out. So within that, what hurt our efforts? I think what made that happen is that they actually had a fairly significant mobilization program. Not that I know the details of it, but I've got a smattering of it. And they've had good outreach. And they also have sort of right-wing promotion. I'll use that term to kind of support that. And that very much helped him. I think our voter registration efforts were hampered, not just because we couldn't get out and actively register voters, but because things like the DMVs were not really operative. And so people, typically a lot of people register the DMVs. That didn't happen. I think it also hampered student registration and so forth. Also, canvassing was hampered. Mostly we didn't do canvassing. And I will say that I think one of the things that really helped Biden in Pennsylvania was the decision maybe 3 weeks before the election. All of a sudden, it turns out they're doing canvassing. And a lot of people in Pennsylvania, a lot of the organizations didn't, but they did. And I myself did a lot of canvassing. A lot of our members and our sister organizations did canvassing. I think that really helped Biden in Pennsylvania. But I think in most places that didn't happen, and the Republicans were doing canvassing. It just hurt us because that's been our sort of major advantage, is having a lot of volunteers willing to canvass and not being able to do it. And also got organized even a bit late in Pennsylvania. It had a few growing pains getting started. Okay, and the polling definitely hurt us. The polling, not just nationally, but even in these legislature races. I mean, I was seeing polling on specific legislature races that showed us ahead in some instances in districts that we ended up losing by several points. So the methodology of the polling really was, and I'm sure people will be scratching their heads trying to figure it out. We can talk a little bit about why I think it might have gone awry. Paradoxically, perhaps, it helped us in one way was because part of the reason I thought we should get involved in Georgia was because Georgia was reasonably positive for Biden and Ossoff, not just at the legislature level. So that's one reason we got involved. And the overall polling for Georgia, at least at the overall level, ended up being pretty close, unlike in some other states like Wisconsin, for example, where it was way off. Something else that we have always known about, but I still feel like as Democrats, we need to kind of figure out a way to better address, is that Republicans basically start off with what I call negative assault messaging. They come up with some figment or fragment of some issue based on their research, and they throw mud at the candidates. And we saw this happening a lot. And basically, Democrats haven't figured out a way to kind of deal with that very well. We maybe ought to be doing more of it ourselves. But the thing that's also related to that is that, and this was especially frustrating in North Carolina, is that for the state legislature, we raised a lot of money for them early on, and the candidates were being assaulted by this negative messaging. And the candidates were being told by the caucus not to spend their money. And that was because they wanted to show they had a lot of money at the end of the quarter. That was because they didn't want to use up the money. They wanted to make sure they had enough money to keep things going. But at least in hindsight, I think that did not serve us well. And then basically what happened was that later in the campaign, they had a lot of money. And then they spent it on expensive TV at a point when it really didn't make any difference. And then lastly, of course, gerrymandering, which we always know makes it tougher for us to win in a lot of these places. So I know this looks like a set of excuses. I guess you can say they are excuses, but I still think they're valid reasons for things that went against us. Okay, and then one of the things, we see articles about this, and it's sort of kind of in the fore of some of what's happening within the Democratic Party, which is that part of what is happening is that Republicans and the people that were marching yesterday, they have an alternative reality. And actually, I feel like we shouldn't even call it a reality. It's a fictionality about, the Trump actually won, you name it, there's all these sort of things. And it's Fox News, it's the right-wing media, radio, and it's also social media machine, which I think has come more and more into focus. People use on a lot of folks, working class folks and other folks, get their news from social media sites on their cell phones or on their computers. And that's their source of news. And things become, amplified, misinformation gets amplified. People send memes around, which is part of the sort of demonizing process and so forth. And, I've seen this referred to as message tested propaganda. And here's some of it. Again, you've seen some of this discussion. Some of it, I think, rightly emanating from Abigail Spanberger. The Republicans are able to frame things and to message things and kind of use a demonizing approach and a disparaging approach to a lot of the things that we think may be important. And first and foremost is defund police. Why we didn't come up with an alternative term for that, like reform the police or support the police to get better or something. It's not as if we don't have smart people that could come up with that, but you just don't even talk about defunding police in that sense. They use these terms, radical left, socialism, court packing, even something like the Green New Deal, which has some merit, even though I don't tend to agree with it. I agree with letting people propose it and so forth. Medicare for all, which I actually do agree with, at least option for all. And here's one that I saw this morning, actually coming out of Perdue's campaign. It's a little bit different, but he's claiming that Ossoff is for voting rights for illegal immigrants. Well, that's absurd on its face. But the fact that they can just sort of throw this sort of thing out on a television ad is kind of what we're up against. Anyway. Okay, so what might we have done differently, and also what might we do differently, which is a slightly different question going forward. Should we have picked different states? I don't know, I don't think so. I feel like Georgia and Pennsylvania at least turned out to be really good states. We also got some benefit out of North Carolina and potentially even Iowa. I don't know what other states would have been ones for us to pick. I suppose you could say that Alaska might not have been such a good choice, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. So that's worth considering. Should we have been focusing on a different level? instead of the legislature? Should we have been focusing on the House and the Senate? Well, in terms of fundraising, I definitely don't think so. They got a huge amount of money, and I still feel like some of our sister organizations, and one in particular is a little embarrassed that they raised money for U.S. Senate for races where money really didn't matter. I mean, people feel free to disagree with any of this, of course. You know, we've had this sort of sweet spot approach, and we tried to play to win, and we didn't win because we were at a certain area where, you know, those folks didn't win. Maybe we should have shot a little bit higher. Again, I don't necessarily think so, because I think maybe perhaps with a possible exception with a couple of races in Georgia, those candidates ended up having plenty of money, and we would not have won. We would have given up our potential to win, and having 1 or 2 additional seats would not have made that much difference. Should we have insisted on earlier spending? Now, I do think maybe there's something to this. I do think that before kind of getting into partnerships with some of these people, somehow get, you know, again, it's their campaigns, and they feel like, you know, and also the caucuses and so forth, they're the engineers of the overall effort. They feel like they know what needs to be done. But I do think that, you know, when I talk to them, at least a couple of them, and have said, you know, it really would have been better if you had been spending money earlier. And, you know, I mean, there are reasons why they think they have to sort of do it the way, there's a playbook and so forth, but I do think that we might exercise more leverage if we got in a similar situation. Try to promote better framing of messaging, sort of the same thing. You know, it's not our job necessarily to come up with a different term for defund the police and try to get people to use it, but I think we can somehow maybe try to help with that. I don't exactly know how. You know, I don't, you know, we love our digital, and when we look at it, we look like it should have had an impact, and based on the metrics, it looks like it probably had an impact. Is there a way we can try to promote digital more widely? I would say that in Iowa and in Georgia, the digital efforts were actually pretty primitive, or maybe that's a little too tough. But and there was no more capacity for Chris Bachman to be doing work in these other places. Similarly, in Pennsylvania, it wasn't particularly all that good either. So, but again, maybe we could try to convince people to use more digital and less, you know, TV. And this is one of the points AOC, she's sort of on this horse. She's saying we should be, Democrats should be doing more digital. And, you know, I think that's the point where I may agree with her. Another approach is supporting local groups more. There's a couple of our partner organizations, that's basically what they do. They didn't support candidates. They just supported C3s and C4s, some of which I tried to drill down on. And I didn't think it was a, you know, really good approach for us, partly because the election was so much impending. But I think, you know, part of the reason to do this is you get a longer term investment payoff if you can figure out which ones are useful to support. So I think that's something that we might want to consider more. And there may be other things. Maybe we can think about totally different ways, and we're going to be, of course, reassessing what we're doing as we always do on an ongoing basis. All right, so now I want to shift to the Georgia runoffs, and I'm going to be talking about the money side of the Georgia runoffs, basically, although a little bit about the strategy. And just to start off with the point that the conventional wisdom always been, well, you know, we always lose the runoffs because the Republicans come out. We might do well in the general, but in the runoffs we lose. I would say that perhaps counterintuitively, this might actually favor us in Georgia. Yes, the Republicans will turn out, many of them, but a lot of the Trump people who turned out just for Trump may not turn out. And this is one of the reasons why I think we have been winning some of these special elections, is because we have a set of fairly motivated Democrats. They're educated in Atlanta and other urban areas. They're African Americans who I think did turn out pretty well in Georgia. I think we can get some youth vote. Again, Trump's not going to be on the ballot, but he may be, raising a ruckus about one thing or another, and that may help bring out our base. Because he may not, he's so unfocused. He may not even focus on winning the Senate races. He didn't really care about the Senate as such, in my opinion, and it won't be if he's not president. So again, that might help us. Who knows? The other thing to realize is that there is massive support from everybody that I've run across for this in terms of money and also in terms of outreach, but particularly money, which is, again, kind of, I think, going to condition our thinking as to where money we might want to raise would be best applied. Turnout, this is going to be a turnout election. Yes, there'll be a little bit of voter registration until December 7th, but it's really going to be turnout because that's what happens in runoffs. But also in Georgia, you have vote by mail and you have early voting. So all that's going to unfold. Again, that's going to need a lot of ground game. It's all going to be about ground game. That's going to be the major emphasis. And also, of course, that can be supported by strong, what I'm calling external and remote. That means us, voter outreach at one time or another. People may have heard, and I think Lisa mentioned, they're not looking for people to come from outside the state to come down and help them. They feel like they've got enough bodies. Now, my understanding is they are going to do in-person ground game, but they have organizations that are going to do it. They're not looking for outsiders to come and do it. So what to support? Well, again, as usual, the two campaigns will have massive amounts of money. They already have massive amounts of money, as well as independent expenditure, the Senate, Democratic Senate, what is it, leadership fund, I forget. It's going to have a lot of money. And again, mostly it's going to be media buys. It's not really going to be the ground game. So that's out, in my opinion. The other thing is, everybody knows about Stacey Abrams, and we think she's wonderful. But her organizations are already getting huge amounts of money, and they will continue to. And that's what our sister organizations here are locally. That's what NOPE is doing. That's what Do the Most Good is doing, I noticed this morning. And that's fine, and that money will be well deployed. But I think amongst a couple of the calls I was on this week, people were saying that she's already like oversubscribed. Now, I don't know if that's a really great term to describe the situation, because probably additional money can be deployed. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to send her money, but I think we may do better. Likewise, I entertained the idea of the Democratic Party coordinated campaign is going to have a significant ground game support, supposedly. Again, recognize, especially in federal campaigns, that the party and these other organizations are isolated from each other. There's like a wall between them. So there'll be two different ground games going on. But again, the people at Swing Left National particularly felt that was going to be really well funded. So what does that leave us with? What leaves us with is there's a large set of smaller on-the-ground organizations that will be conducting a ground game, and that, as far as we can tell, need support. One of the ways to support that is through something called the Movement Voter Project, which is kind of an umbrella for these smaller organizations. And we'll probably have a fund for the C3s. Remember, C3s are the charitable organizations. Tax deductible C4s are still not for profit, but they're not tax deductible. They're more partisan. So that's, again, a possibility for us. the situation, though, is that I've been working very hard to try to figure out the best way to do this alternative, and I do think it's the best alternative. But I'm not at the point of making a recommendation yet. Hopefully, in the next few days, I will be of how the best way to support these on-the-ground organizations. But we will stay nimble and we'll change if we start with one set and we need to change it. But I've developed an illustrative list of these on-the-ground organizations. What is this, about 15? And there's probably twice that many that come well recommended by one or another, or actually two or more in most cases, other people who support these organizations. And as you can see, they're a combination of African-American, Latino, Asian American groups, and so forth. So again, it's very, very difficult to get a good sense of how effective these organizations are. I think we'll have to take some of it on faith. But anyway, this is, I think, the direction that I'm going to be recommending. Our management group leadership group, will be meeting tomorrow to maybe talk some more about this once we get some more information. So at the moment, we don't have anything concrete to recommend, but I hope that we will in a few days, hopefully. And of course, once we do, Lisa will send it out in her letter, and we'll put it on the website. So more to come on the Georgia runoffs. And of course, the final message is we always press hard until the end. We're not at the end yet. So let's keep pressing. And that is the end of my presentation for now.
Great. So Aaron Hamburger, our membership chair, he is going to sort of MC the questions. There's been a zillion questions. So he's going to curate those and direct them to Jim or other people who might have the information.
Great. Would you like me to do that? Should we do that right now? Okay. So we had a fair amount of questions, a lot about North Carolina and Alaska. So maybe we can just start with North Carolina, and specifically, You Can Vote. Did the You Can Vote tents, did they do any good? How was the money spent? For example, tents for You Can Vote versus voter ballot education. How did our investment in You Can Vote do generally?
Well, I think those voter tents, are the safe haven tents. I mean, one good thing is we were not aware of major incidents. The election went off without major. Now that may have happened anyway, and but you can maybe give them some credit that we didn't have major intimidation. Second thing is that in terms of voter education, that was in part and parcel of what they were trying to do. So this was on site. They were on site to help voters understand, not for mail-in, not for vote by mail, but for people who were doing early voting and then ultimately voting to do that. Now, in terms of vote by mail instructions, which may have been what our person was getting at, maybe it was Carol Preston, I don't know. But we did try to pursue the idea of doing a video on instructions to help people do that. I think we were kind of late to the party to try to realize that that was that would help. And we actually had on our website and did provide to You Can Vote I forget what you call it, a figure that showed people how they should be doing their mail-in vote. So anyway, I guess that's my response.
Great. And You Can Vote actually sent out an email afterwards saying that turnout, I think in North Carolina, was something around 75%.
Yeah, that's right.
So, turnout was boosted, but unfortunately, Trump turnout boosted as well. Now, there have been a number of questions also about Alaska and how did the Indigenous voter outreach program that we worked on turn out? Do we have any feedback on that?
I sent an email to the Gross campaign and haven't heard back from them. I mean, it was a valiant effort in its design, and there was also a similar one in East Anchorage, a very diverse part of Alaska's largest city. But you know, the design was really to get out the vote, you know, door-to-door canvassing for people who would typically vote in person in the Alaska Native villages on election day. But I haven't heard back, so I don't have any data on that. I'm sorry.
I don't have any data on it either. But since I played a role in persuading our group to get involved, I guess I probably should say a few things. Unfortunately, I am totally and completely mystified by the fact that Al Gross lost by 13%, other than it's clear that a lot of Republican-leaning voters returned to their normal inclination. One thing I do know that hurt Gross was when the state of Alaska took off the independent label from Al's listing on the ballot. As I think most folks know, Al is a registered independent, but had the Democratic nomination. And for the first time in Alaska's fairly short history, they refused to allow the independent label to be on the ballot, even though that is what Gross is registered as. And you know, he would have caucused with the Senate Democrats, which is obviously why we supported him. But that doesn't explain what happened. I mean, he lost by 13%, and I've been involved in politics all my life, and I would have bet any amount of money that he wouldn't have lost by double digits. I thought it was going to be at least a close race. I certainly wasn't sure he was going to win, but I'm stunned that he lost by 13 points.
Yeah,
So it
what's ironic?
Let me just finish one thing. I
Okay.
think it's very important to remember that we also, by our $200,000 that we invested in the Native American program, and I don't know the Alaska Native program, I don't know, and we don't have the data yet, but I'm sure that we, by doing that, increased turnout in Alaska. There's no way that we didn't. And I think it's very worth noting that there's a ballot initiative in Alaska called Measure 2. That is a combination of nonpartisan open primaries and ranked choice voting, and which I am strongly believe in. And I'm obviously I'm a strong believer in ballot initiatives to begin with, because I think oftentimes we, by focusing only on candidates, we end up, throwing, just as Jim said, a lot of money at races that don't really need the money, where ballot initiatives really do need money and can oftentimes change the structure of how elections are run, for one thing. But in Alaska, in this instance, Measure 2 right now is 1,500 votes ahead. So I have no doubt that the majority of the people that we brought to the polls by our $200,000 voted in favor of Measure 2. And if it passes, it may not, but I think it will. It's going to change the structure of Alaska races going forward. So even though we got smoked with our money on Al Gross, I don't think it was a loss. I really think that money is likely to perhaps be the difference in whether Measure 2 passes or not. And if that, we'll never know that for sure, but I'm going to hang on to that if it does pass. And if it does, I think our $200,000 will have played a very big and important role in changing the way Alaska elections are done from here on out.
I'm just really reassured by how engaged everybody is in trying to figure out what the hell happened, and also to go forward. I mean, it's really going to be a question, what 31st Street looks like after January 5th. We'll just see, but no matter what, we're going to still be here. And whoever has energy to go forward, you're going to come with us. So we're not going anywhere. So we'll stick around. You can say goodbye now if you'd like, and we thank you for coming, and have a wonderful evening and good week. But we'll stick around to chat a little further.
Hi, this is Annette Lang. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to say thank you. I mean, the leadership of 31st Street Swing Left is exceptional. You're phenomenal. And I don't think any of you need to lower your head or be remotely discouraged by the work that our group did this session. I think a few people seem a little bit defensive. Don't be. You guys put on a great ground game. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. That's the nature of the game. And I think everybody should hold their heads up so high and really take a bow, because you're fantastic. And I did want to get that out there.
I agree.
Thank you. Thank you. We're trying not to be defensive. We're trying to